Hi, it's Jared from Strong Roots Farm. Today we're back in the classroom and we're going to talk about eggs, egg costing. March of 2025 and eggs have gone crazy, and there are all kinds of videos out there, whether they be from the fear-mongering side of the government's doing this and eggs are not going to be available. The prices are going crazy. We're having a bird flu and people are talking about destroying birds and you shouldn't have birds. There's all kind of madness going on as it comes with eggs. I want to talk about the truth. I want to give you some numbers. What does it actually cost to raise eggs? So the people who don't raise eggs are all up in arms about the cost of eggs. But when it comes down to it, what does it actually cost us homesteaders, us small farmers, to raise a dozen eggs? So we're going to talk about today. We're in the classroom. We're going to do the math. I'm going to show you everything. If you're looking to get chickens, because the chicks are gone everywhere. TSC, Rural King, they can't keep them in stock because now that eggs are high, everybody thinks they want their own chickens, but they don't even know what eggs are actually going to cost them. That's what we're going to do today. Stick around. Welcome back. Appreciate everybody joining us. As we go through these, I will tell you that there are some actual numbers here. We went through, I've talked to many different people, and this is not what we did exactly, but what I have seen a lot of other people spend. And these numbers might scare you when we actually get into this. I will go through the actual scenarios of what we're going to do, and you'll see the numbers. And if you're thinking this is way off base, he has no clue what he's talking about, at the end of the video, I will show you how to lower the cost. I will give you some ideas, some things that you can do, but I promise you the scenario that I'm going to show today is a very real, often used scenario when we're talking about people with their backyard chickens or homesteaders, even small farmers. So we're going to go through some actual numbers here. Let's get started first with what equipment do we need? Okay, so as we get started, we're going to need a lot of stuff to raise these chickens, and all of this needs to go into our costing of our eggs as we get these back from our layers. So you need a coop or a chicken tractor, whatever design or purchase that you decide you need there, you're going to need something to keep these chickens safe, and whether you decide to move them or have a run or whatever, you need something there. You need a waterer. They got to have water. So whether you build one or buy one, you need a waterer. You need a feeder of some sort. Now, you know, some people say, oh, we just throw our feet on the ground. And yes, you could probably get away with that. And that will be towards the end of the video. But most people buy a feeder. You need a supplemental feeder. Just because we have one, I decided to put that in. We have a separate PVC feeder that we only put oyster shell or grit into. And so you're going to probably need either two of the same feeders or a pan or some kind of supplemental feeder, we'll call it. You need a heat lamp for the winter. So as you say chicken tractor up here, what are you going to do with those chickens in the winter? Are you going to move that someplace secure, cover it with plastic? You have to plan for all of that. So I have a heat lamp there just because something needs to be done to protect those chickens during the cold. And then you need the actual birds or chicks, whichever way you decide to go. You need those to start. That's the input equipment before we ever get the first egg. As we got our numbers in here now, we've got $2,000 for a chicken coop. Now some of you might think that number is astronomical because you're buying something cheaper. But if you go around and look at what people are actually buying and using as chicken coops, that's not far off. That what I see the average person buying at Home Depot or Lowe's or from the Amish here in our area, by the time they get that thing delivered or put together, they've got $2,000 in that chicken coop. $50 water, you can pick those up pretty much anywhere. I got $25 for a feeder. You could find this stuff cheaper. Like I said, we'll talk about it. I put $10 for that supplemental feeder. I just use a piece of PVC. Heat lamp's 25 bucks. And I decided in this scenario to buy birds, ready laying hens that are just started laying for $20 a piece. This whole scenario will be off a 10 hen scenario. So everything we do today is going to be, we bought 10 hens. So our total input of equipment day one is $2,310. Now we're also going to have yearly costs. So we have $140 a year for feed for those 10 hens, remember. Now this is the number that I use for my hens, okay? So I have about this amount of size. We do not sell eggs any longer on our homesteader farm. We just raise eggs for ourselves. 140, 150 bucks a year is about what I spend in chicken feed. I'll go over that number later. We spent $18 this year on oyster shell because we keep that on hand to them all the time. $54 for shavings. That is 10 bags of shavings a year. I think maybe 9 where I came up with that number. People put shavings in their coop. If you use straw or hay, you can use anything, but I went ahead and put a cost for that. And then I made up a number for water, 10 bucks. It's not very expensive, the water that they actually drink, but it is an input cost. And so we have $10 for water. Makes our total cost for the year $222 for those 10 hens. That is our input cost. Now, how many eggs from these 10 hens are you gonna get? So each breed will have a different number. So I used kind of an average number. We have Barred Rocks, Rhode Island Reds, a few other breeds, but we get about 300 to 290 eggs per year out of each chick, each hen that we have. Okay, so I use 290. There are some heritage birds that will get less than that. There are some more hybrid or commercial birds that'll get it higher than that. But we went with 290, put it to whatever you want in your scenario. Times 10 birds is 2,900 eggs a year we're gonna get from these chickens, or 483.3 dozen eggs. All right, we're gonna do this on a 2-year scenario and a 4-year scenario. So I'll go through this and as far as why we do this, but the birds will lay eggs from the time they start laying to the time that most people get rid of them is about 2 years. They could go longer. The production goes down after that 2-year point. You could keep birds for 4 years. In this scenario today, we're gonna say from the time they start laying, you keep them from 24 to 28 months, and then you get rid of them and get another set of birds for the second set of 2 years. But you'll see as we go through this, understand this is a long game on how much these eggs cost. We're gonna do 2 scenarios. We did 1 round of them and this is not for us, or we decided to go the second round. Each year after this, the things get cheaper, but we're going to do this in these 2 scenarios for you. All right, so earlier when I said 483 dozen, that was for the first 2 years, right? That's what that first 2-year hen would lay in dozens of eggs when you're getting 2,900 eggs per year. That would be a total of 5,800 that you would get out of 1 bird for that scenario, or those 10 birds for that scenario, right? So for the 2-year scenario, we have $2,754 a cost. That is our initial input 2310 plus 2 years worth of the 222. That gives us our 2,754, and we got 483 dozen eggs. If we did this again for 4 years, we would have $3,398 in it. So we took the 2310, it has the same 2310. All of that equipment we bought, we amortized over 4 years, but then we added in 4 years of the yearly input. So that would have been the 888. And we also had to buy our second round of $200 worth of birds. So that was added in. That's how we got our 3,398. But we ended up with 966 dozen eggs at the end of our 4th year. Before we show the rest of these numbers, I want to bring this up because I'm seeing complaints of people that don't raise chickens and don't know the actual math. And they say, I've seen people say, anybody who charges more than $4 a dozen is just ripping people off. Well, 483 dozen, that was our first 2 years, at $4 a dozen is $1,932. But our first 2 years cost us $2,754. And there was no labor. All right, so here's your totals. If you only did this for the 2 years and you got the 483 dozen, you would have spent $5.90 per dozen eggs that you got without labor. If you did it for 4 years, because we're amortizing that initial equipment cost out further, you got 966 dozen, and you've paid $3.51 per dozen. No labor. This number's not looking so bad now though. I could pay $3.50 for a dozen eggs. But what about, we're running a business here. What about if we had labor in it? So the way I figured out labor was, let's just say this only takes us 10 minutes a day, 10 minutes a day, every day. We collect eggs every day. So 10 minutes a day, every day, and I was able to hire an employee for $10 an hour. Well, if you want to work for $10 an hour, please call me up. But that's what we're going to run our numbers off of. So just so you're aware, 10 minutes a day at $10 an hour, if I only had to pay you for those 10 minutes a day, would have been 60.8 hours a year you would work. At 10 bucks an hour is $608 a year for labor on these chickens. And so with labor, our first 2 years, our eggs were $8.42 a dozen. For the end of the 4 years with labor, it was $6.03 a dozen. Now, one thing I did not calculate into here is the carton. If you have to buy a specific carton and pay a local fee, so if you have to have a license to sell eggs where you live and you have to pay for that license, that's not in here. If you have to buy a special carton with a special label, that's not in here. If you have to have a special refrigeration unit to sell at a farmer's market or off of your farm, that's not in here. So when people are getting worked up about eggs, about the price of their eggs, and they're going and buying chicks, and they think you can raise them for so cheap, or if you have a homestead or a small farm and you raise eggs, I've seen people expect me to give them away like they're just free. They just come. Understand the true numbers. Eggs can be quite expensive. All right, so I want to bring you back to some joy and some actual things to help you here, because I want to tell you on our farm, when we cost out our eggs and we pay our children for labor, so we pay our kids every time they collect eggs, so labor is in this, it costs us about $2.62 a dozen. Now we get free egg cartons, so people give us these donor cartons, so I don't pay for that. I don't have to have any special washing station or refrigeration or license. These are just us raising the eggs, raising the chickens for ourselves. And that's one major reason that we do not sell off our farm, because people still complained about $4 eggs, and I wasn't willing to do it to make $1.30 a dozen. Plus, I would have to have a license and a washing station and a special refrigerator separate just to be able to sell eggs where I'm at. So we decided we're only raising eggs for ourselves. But I just showed you that high number. How are we able to do it for the 262? So let's get into some things of how you can lower the numbers. All right, so we're just gonna go through each line item and talk about how we can lower it. So the coop, a $2,000 coop. You realize now if you're going and buying one of these pretty decorative coops that cost $2,000, that's really gonna hurt the cost of your eggs. You have to find a way to lower that cost. Now I will tell you, I've been able to build a chicken tractor for about $100 using scrap wood, stuff that I find. My biggest expense when I build coops is wire. I do buy high quality 1/4 inch hardware cloth wire, and I build everything myself with scrap stuff that we have around. I would say the average coop that I have had is somewhere around 10% of this, around $200 for a coop. I could build a coop. Now, is it as pretty as that fancy one? Nope. But you can lower and find a way to build a cheaper coop than $2,000. You can also look for a nice one on Facebook Marketplace. I did this little research today, and I saw them for $500 to $600 for people who did it for 2 years and figured out this is more work than they were really in for, and now they want out, and you can start for about 25% of what they paid for that original coop. Now there are smaller coops at TSC and Home Depot and places like that that you can put together. I saw those as well. They were in that $500 to $700 range, but most of those coops only hold 3 to 5 birds. So this whole scenario was we want 10 hens. How many eggs do you actually need? You might want to cost that out, figure that out. How many hens do you actually need? But lowering that coop cost is the very first thing we can do to lower our egg cost. The next thing to lower our cost is our feeders and waters. And I'm going to tell you, I don't really recommend it. Okay, I don't recommend trying to cut cost here. What I have found is when people try to make their own waterers, they end up spending just about the same amount of money because they spend a lot of time building them, whatever they're going to do. But I will put some things down in the description that may help you with feeders. So I have found some bucket feeders. They take a 5-gallon bucket and they cut this little notch into them, and the chick can put their head in, and then they put a lid on the bucket, and they can fill these with feed and hang them up. So I'll put those things. I've bought some on Amazon. I kind of like these feeders. They do work very well. They send you the bit for the hole saw. You drill a hole as low as you can. You put this unit in. It makes a pretty nice feeder, but it's not much different. I think we put down 25 bucks originally. It's not much different. I think you can get it for $16, $18, but there is a little bit of savings there if you want to tinker around in your shop and build one yourself. A waterer, I've seen a lot of people use lots of different things, buckets, barrels, whatever they can find for cheap, and put nipple waterers in them. They do work very well. I have lots of these. I've used lots of these in the past. I will put the link down there for my favorite nipple, okay, the chicken nippler. I'll put it down there, the only one that I really use anymore. But I'll tell you, if you're just beginning, a high quality waterer that you'll see that I'll put a link for down in the description as well for a good waterer, it's really worth it. And I have found them cheaper on Marketplace. So that's where I would look. Marketplace for feeders and waterers. You can save some money on those things. The other thing I had in here was the heat lamp. Okay, so you gotta find a way to keep your chickens warm in the winter, or at least from freezing, whether that's an insulated coop, and maybe you're down south and you don't even need that, so you could just scratch that item off the list. If you're gonna use a heat lamp because chickens get really cold, or a greenhouse, or whatever you're gonna use, you're also probably gonna have a problem with water freezing, so you're gonna need some kind of a float heater. And I didn't put anywhere in our evaluation electricity for any of these three things, whether that be a heat lamp or any of that. So if you're on solar, you really need to think about that as well. But I'm just gonna leave that to you. There are ways out there. There's lots of different videos on how to keep chicken waters from freezing, but how to use a heat lamp, things you can use instead of a heat lamp, greenhouses, plastic, things you can do for your birds. That's gonna be on you, and it's so different for so many people. I'm gonna not give too many suggestions here because weather is so different all over, but you're gonna look into that, and you can look on Marketplace and find those things for cheaper as well. Next, let's talk about feed. So I had $140 on feed for 10 hens. And actually we have the hens and a rooster. So there's another one there that's not giving us an egg. But feed is one cost that I was pretty cheap on, I think, in this evaluation. For us, because I have seen people spend way more money on feed. So the way I keep my feed cost low is, one, we allow them to graze around the cattle so they eat less feed in the summer when they can eat bugs. That is one way to decrease your food cost. Also, table scraps. We feed our chickens the offal from our animals, meaning the liver, the kidneys, the heart, the tongue. You can have that ground, cook that up. You don't have to, they can't eat it raw, but we give that to our chickens to save on feed cost as well. Table scraps, all those things can lower your feed cost. If you're buying high-end chicken feed that's pelletized from a TSC or Rural King, I guarantee you can lower this cost. We get our feed from a local feed mill. It's only $9 a bag, and they have a special mix for us, but it's not organic. Some of our feed is. We have an organic pelletized feed, but our feed mill feed is not certified organic because they don't want to pay for that certification. That's how they keep costs low. There are many other different things though. You can look into just cracked corn and some bird style feed, many different feeds here that you can lower cost, but I'll tell you that $140 is pretty low end. Now you could use compost. You could build compost piles and do the permaculture method where you build a compost pile and you put food scraps on top of it and they dig through it, and you never have to buy a bag pelletized feed. I haven't seen that work for us. I'm just gonna give you that advice there. But lowering that feed cost is one way. You can lower your egg cost, of course, but $140 is probably around about where you're gonna be with 10 birds. All right, the last one on our list that was kind of expensive, I agree, with buying bag pre-made shavings at a TSC or Rural King, big box store, wherever. If you're buying shavings for your chickens, those can get expensive. You can find free wood chips, you can use straw or leftover hay from other animals. So shavings, those kind of things in their coop. You can also have a chicken tractor style of a coop that does not need shavings, where the manure falls through wire in a chicken chateau. If you look at Justin Rhodes, that's what he uses. You can have a coop that moves and the ground is actually their bedding. And so you can lower this cost, but in the winter, you're gonna need some kind of a shavings for whatever building that they are in. We use about 1 to 2 bags of shavings for 8 months of the year. And then during the winter, we're using 1 bag every month. So it's really the winter time that accumulates our shavings cost. I do prefer the purchase shavings. They're lighter, they feel easier, they're easier for my kids to carry, and I find it's much harder to carry or to clean up a hay or a straw. It doesn't absorb like the purchased wood shavings or sawdust. There is some avenues though to save money and still get that quality. If you can find a local wood shop that will give you their sawdust, that would work just as well and lower that cost. The other thing to reduce cost is reducing your labor. And so if you decide, I put this in here so that I'm not beat up on, is this a real business? I wanted you to see the actual cost if you're paying yourself for labor when you're trying to raise and sell eggs. If you are selling eggs, you need to account for labor. If you're doing it as a homesteader for yourself and you're okay with not doing it and just saying how cheap can we just feed our family, and it's all about saving money at the grocery store, that's kind of how we look at it. Labor's not a big deal here, but reducing costs on labor, some things that you can do. You can buy roll-away nest boxes. That will speed up your egg collection points, okay? So rather than going in and collecting them by hand, that will speed that up. But usually, roll-away nest boxes take either a long time to build, or if you purchase them, they're quite expensive. I will tell you, and the reason I'm bringing this up is it's better to take more time to collect eggs out of a free nest box, whether that be an old milk crate or an old box of some sort. Something cheaper on the equipment in list usually will pay itself out more in the eggs than having an expensive $700 roll-away nest box to make your egg collecting faster. But if you're selling eggs, you need to calculate for labor especially. I want to talk about some other incomes, okay? The one thing we did not talk about is we were buying full-grown birds. And just to lay that out for you, I always recommend if you're starting out buying full-grown birds, don't buy chicks because there's risk evaluated there that is high. There's a high chance of losing chicks. There's a high chance of you even buying sexed birds and still ending up with a bunch of roosters. So chicks, to get them to lay eggs, it still costs $13 or $14 in our method. And so it's worth it to me to buy a known hen that's laying for $20 than it is to raise a chick for 6 months for $14, just to get that out of the way. But there are other incomes from these birds that you can have besides the eggs, and the eggs being a major source of income, but there's still more side income that you can accumulate to lower your egg cost. So let's just talk about the non-calculated benefits first. So fertilizer, your birds can build compost and you can put that on your garden. For us, they fertilize the pasture. So there's an increased benefit to us that we're not calculating in income by this fertilizer from these chickens. The second thing for us especially is decreased bug pressure. So they eat flies, they eat bugs, they eat pests, right? So that's an added benefit to us. I don't have to spend money on fly chemicals. I don't have to spend money on other fly protection stuff, or it's a decreased amount on our farm because our birds are out with our cows and they're eating those bugs. So that is an extra income and it's not calculated anywhere. Something that is definitely not calculated is decreased stress. So chickens have been found to decrease the stress of their owners. Now, we all know the story of that one rooster that was a pain in our butt, or the chickens got out and that time that they caused us stress. We can all bring up those points. But overall, those animals decrease stress in people, increasing your health. And so there's no cost for that out there, or how do you put that in income? And that's pretty minute, but they are a help to your health. And the last thing on that list, the uncalculated things, if you're one of these preppers, they do bring independence. So if you're all about having your own food, knowing where it comes from, and being safe from away from the grocery store, so when the stuff hits the fan, you're secure and you like that and it's a peace of mind for you, yes, chickens, there is value in having your own independence, going out and getting your eggs when you need them, and not having to go to the store, fuel savings to go to the store, whatever it would be. There is some income or value in being independent with your chickens. But some actual financial benefits at the end that we didn't talk about, that where you can add cost in or add income in. You can sell these birds at the end of their 2-year life as soup birds. So you can butcher the bird, sell the bird, but they are very cheap. And so I usually don't bring this up because the labor to butcher that bird usually ends up being about what people spend on the bird. So I've seen soup birds sell for as low as $5, but as high as $10. So you sell or you take a butchered bird and you put that in a crock pot or in a big soup stock, and it will give you some meat. It's going to give you great broth, but usually these birds are thinner than a meat bird. You're not going to have a lot of meat on them. So we call them soup birds, and you can sell those birds as live birds or as butchered birds like that. You also have stew meat. So you could butcher these birds, have ground chicken or shredded chicken. You put that into a crock pot and you get stewed chicken. That is another form of meat that you could sell or protect for yourself. And then the last, we do this, is broth. You can just fillet this bird open with no equipment. I do have a video on that I will link down in the description. Cut out the breasts and what meat you can get to. Cut out the backbones if you want. Put them into a crock pot or a big stew pot, and you can make gallons upon gallons of broth out of those 10 birds. We do not sell that broth because we have to have a canning license in Ohio, but that is a cost savings for us. So we could put that in as income. We got 10 quarts of broth at the end, and so that could come back out to lower our egg costs if you'd like to do that. But there are some other incomes in here. The other thing you could do, if you get good egg, big, healthy, hardy birds, and you started hatching your own eggs, you can sell hatched eggs for about $10 a dozen, meaning eggs that people will put into incubators. You could do that if you had a rooster. You could also hatch your own birds. So from here on out, you don't have that $200 cost for those next set of birds. Or you could sell chicks off of those hatched eggs, but know that you're selling that as a chick and not as an egg to eat. It's the same 290 eggs a year. And then you could sell breed stock chickens. So you could hatch the eggs, raise that chick to 20 weeks, and then sell it as an egg-laying chicken. So you could turn this into multiple avenues of income and not just the eggs. Last thing we're going to talk about here that people don't often account for when they go out and buy chicks, when they complain about eggs and the price of eggs, is the risks that we take as homesteaders and small farmers. So obviously chickens, they're not very vicious. So they have a lot of predators. They are low on the food chain. So weasels, foxes, pretty much anything, dogs, neighborhood dogs, coons, they all eat chickens. And so there is a risk for us as homesteaders and small farmers of losing our investment with the chicks, with the chickens, and with the eggs. Snakes eat eggs, rats eat eggs. So there's risk there that a lot of people don't think about, the predator pressure. Also, what happens if you want to take a vacation? Who takes care of this? Do you have a hired hand on your farm or homestead? Do you have somebody that can watch your homestead and take care of your chickens? Let them in and out? Have you bought a solar door? What's going to happen when you want to take a vacation? So it's going to limit that when you get chickens. And then, of course, we have the cold. What are you going to do during the cold? Do you need a separate coop? Do you have an extra barn that you can put them in a horse stall or whatever you've made? What happens during the cold? Are you able to fight during the cold? There's all these risks during the cold. We lose chickens every year during the cold if you have a bunch. I've seen everybody loses chickens during the cold. So what are you going to do to protect them? There's also added risks with that and weather and those kind of things. The one risk that everybody is concerned about right now is this avian bird flu. I am not concerned. I'm not worried about my chickens catching some special flu. We don't keep them cooped up like Big Ag does. We don't keep them in a confinement setting. And so they're not getting this flu like everybody talks about. It's not the scare that is there. We don't have the same issues. We don't vaccinate. We don't have any of those problems. We don't give antibiotics because we're not confining them in a large confinement operation. And when you look at, well, eggs are $1 a dozen or $2 a dozen, a year ago in the grocery store, well, that's the reason why, because they have them in a large confinement, substandard living space, if you ask me, for these chickens. And that's how you get cheap eggs. Low labor, possibly even, foreigner labor or under the table labor, with these chickens in these houses. That's how eggs are built to be cheap. But they're cheap quality eggs. They're not good for your health, and the birds are sick. They're given antibiotics and hormones and all kinds of things. And that is what's causing all of the ruckus in the market right now. There you have it. People have complimented me on my videos like this where I go through the actual costing. So I hoped this one helped you. I hope it does not scare you off from raising your own egg layers though. It can be costly. And I wanted to show the truth though. I wanted to show what I've seen people do when they actually count the cost. And so I hope you see that, that fancy chicken coop, the chicks don't care. They don't care what it looks like. They don't care what color it is. They don't care that it has a flower pot hanging from the window on their coop, right? The chickens do not care. But for some reason, some people think that they need to have something pretty in their yard, but it will increase the cost of your eggs, making it really not worth it. It's really just going to be a hobby for you. So I encourage you to look at this, strongly consider the actual cost of it when you go to building your coop. How can you use recycled material? How can you build something that is nice, that works, that is totally functional, but is from something much cheaper because you're looking to actually save money for your family or for your selling of your eggs on your small farmer homestead. Appreciate you watching till the end. Like and subscribe if you follow along with us. We are open to any comments. If you disagree, agree with me, let me know. I try to do this as honest and as forthcoming as I can be. There's nothing, I'm hiding nothing here. I'll have stuff down in the description to help you if it will. We appreciate everybody though that follows along and continues to stay with us on our farm, and we will be there till next time.